Zootopia, where our ancestors first joined together in peace and declared that anyone can be anything!
I want you to remember this moment the next time you think you will ever be anything more than just a stupid carrot farming dumb bunny.
Rabbit Officer Judy Hopps. Assistant Mayor Bellwether.
Yes.
Oh, Goodwin's over there to the left. No, there are.
Hey, little guy, you want to be an elephant when you grow up? You be an elephant. Because this is Zootopia. Anyone can be anything.
Oh, boy, I tell him that all.
I'll bite your face off.
I stood up for you, and you lied. You liar.
There is a city that looks at first like a promise, glass towers reaching into clean blue air, trains sliding between climates as if the world has learned how to fold itself neatly, tiny doors beside giant ones, neighborhoods built for every shape of body, every speed of movement, every kind of hunger and instinct and dream. It is bright, clever, colorful, alive. It tells you, before anyone says a thing, that difference can become architecture, that a society can be designed around the beautiful difficulty of everyone existing together. Welcome to the Cineflex, and today we are stepping into Zootopia, a film that wears the shape of a family animated adventure but carries inside it something sharper, sadder, and more human than its surface first suggests. This is a movie about animals, yes, but only in the way fables have always used animals, not to escape from human behavior, but to make it visible, to take the things we are too defensive to see in ourselves and reflect them back with fur, claws, ears, paws, uniforms, badges, smiles, suspicion, and fear. Here's the thing about this film, it is easy to remember it as charming. Easy to remember the jokes, the fast little details, the city itself, the way each environment feels like a toy box designed by someone with endless imagination. It is easy to remember Judy Hopps as determined and bright-eyed, Nick Wilde as smooth and wounded, the sloths as a perfect piece of comic timing. But when you sit with it longer, when you let the film breathe beyond its cleverness, something else rises to the surface. This is a story about what people believe before they think. It is about the quiet violence of assumptions. It is about how a society can congratulate itself for being inclusive while still building invisible walls everywhere. It is about the dream of becoming who you are told you cannot be, and the pain of discovering that even good intentions can carry old poison inside them. And what this film understands in its most effective moments is that prejudice is not always announced with cruelty. Sometimes it arrives politely. Sometimes it arrives through concern. Sometimes it wears a friendly face and speaks in the language of safety. That is what makes Zootopia more interesting than a simple animated mystery. Beneath the buttercup energy, beneath the bright chase sequences and comic world building, there is a nervous little question beating through the whole film. What happens when a city is proud of its progress but has not truly healed from its fear? Think about what that means for a film released by Disney Animation. A studio built on wonder, emotion, and fantasy chooses to build a world where the fantasy is not escape but contradiction. A place where anyone can be anything, and yet almost everyone is still quietly trapped inside what others expect them to be. A place that says the right words, hangs the right banners, celebrates the right ideals, but still trembles when old instincts are provoked. And this is why I want to approach Zootopia carefully. Not just as a clever movie, not just as a successful animated film, not just as a colorful piece of entertainment with a message. I want to look at it as a modern fable that tries, within the limits of a studio film, to ask what tolerance really means when it is tested. I want to look at how it uses genre humor, noir shadows, city planning, character wounds, and social metaphor to create something that feels simple enough for a child to follow, but layered enough for an adult to keep returning to. Because cinema rarely does this with complete ease. It is one thing for a film to say that fear divides people. It is another thing to show how fear becomes policy, how language becomes suspicion, how a headline can change the way strangers look at each other, how one careless statement can turn private bias into public damage. Zootopia does not handle every one of these ideas perfectly, and we will talk honestly about where the film's metaphor becomes too neat, too compressed, or too convenient. But even in its imperfections, there is something worth studying. There is a reason this film stayed with so many people. Maybe it is because Judy's dream is so familiar. That feeling of being small in a world that has already decided your size should define your future. That ache of wanting not just success but recognition, not praise exactly, something deeper, the right to be taken seriously. Maybe it is because Nick's smile is also familiar, that kind of humor people build when they have been hurt early and learn to survive by never looking surprised. The kind of confidence that is really armor, the kind of charm that says, I know what the world thinks of me, so I will become it before it can wound me again. Or maybe it is because the city itself feels like the fantasy many societies tell about themselves, diverse, modern, open, full of possibility. And yet, beneath the moving trains and polished windows, the same old questions remain. Who gets trusted? Who gets feared? Who gets forgiven? Who has to prove they are safe before they are allowed to simply exist? That is the emotional intention of this essay. To walk through Zootopia not as a product, but as a living little world. To feel the wonder of its design, the cleverness of its mystery, the warmth of its central friendship, and also the unease underneath it. To ask why its brightest images often carry shadows. to ask what this film achieved when it lets its comedy open the door to something more painful. And before we enter the film itself, before we follow Judy from the quiet farmland of Bunnyborough into the impossible scale of the city, we need to pause outside the frame for a moment. Because Zootopia did not appear from nowhere. It arrived at a very particular time, into a world already arguing with itself about identity, fear, belonging, and the stories people tell about progress. So first, we have to look at the world this film was born into. To understand Zootopia, you have to remember what animation felt like around 2016. The medium was not fighting to be taken seriously in the same way it once had. By then, animated films had already proven that they could be emotionally devastating, culturally enormous, formally inventive, and commercially unstoppable. Pixar had helped reshape the conversation years earlier. DreamWorks had turned irreverence into its own language. Disney animation, after a long and uneven journey, had found a new confidence again through films like Tangled, Wreck-It Ralph, Reason, and Big Hero 6. So when Zootopia arrived, it did not arrive into a world that doubted animation's power. It arrived into a world asking what else animation could hold. And that question matters because Zootopia is not simply using animals because animals are cute, or because animal characters sell plush toys, or because children understand them instantly. It belongs to an older storytelling tradition, the fable, the parable, the moral mirror, the kind of story where a fox is never only a fox, a rabbit is never only a rabbit, and the city of mammals becomes a way to talk about civilization without pointing too directly at any one real place. In 2016, the world outside the cinema was already tense with arguments about identity, fear, belonging, migration, policing, social division, and who gets to feel safe in public life. You could feel everywhere the gap between the language of progress and the reality of old suspicion. People were speaking more openly about bias, representation, and discrimination, but openness does not mean resolution. Sometimes it only means the wound is finally visible. That is the strange power of Zootopia's timing. It comes wrapped in the brightness of a Disney adventure, but it enters a cultural moment where its central question feels almost uncomfortably alive. Can a society call itself modern if its imagination is still ruled by inherited fear? And what is fascinating is that the film does not begin by presenting Zootopia as broken. It begins with the dream, the slogan, the shining surface, a place where anyone can become anything. That phrase feels like the emotional language of the 2010s, aspirational, inclusive, polished, almost corporate in its optimism. It sounds beautiful because it is beautiful, but the film's entire dramatic movement is built around testing that promise until the cracks appear. This is what makes the world of the film feel so connected to the world that produced it. Many societies love telling stories about progress as if progress is a destination. As if once the right words are said, once diversity is celebrated in public, once the posters look correct and the city looks modern, the deeper work is finished. Zootopia gently but firmly says no. The words matter, but the word beneath the words matters more. And in cinema, that was a brave space for a mainstream animated film to step into. Not because prejudice had never been explored before, but because Zootopia tried to put those ideas inside a genre engine that was accessible, funny, fast, and emotional. It is a buddy cop story. It is a mystery. It is a city film. It is a social allegory. It is a comedy about scale, instinct, and bureaucracy. It is also quietly a story about how fear can be manufactured and then sold back to people as common sense. The film's reception tells us something important about how strongly that mixture connected. It became a major worldwide success, earning over $1 billion globally, and Box Office Mojo lists it among the top worldwide releases of 2016. But numbers alone do not explain why it resonated. Plenty of films make money and then fade into the background of a year. Zootopia did something more lasting. It became part of the conversation people were already having, even if they did not always name that conversation directly. Critically, it was embraced not just as entertainment but as one of Disney Animation's more ambitious modern works. It won the Academy Award for Best Animated Feature at 89th Academy Awards, where the Academy listed Byron Howard, Rich Moore, and Black Spencer with the winning film. It also won the Golden Globe for Best Animated Feature, and awards bodies across that season treated it as more than a clever commercial hit. But here is what I keep returning to. Awards recognized its craft, its popularity proved its reach, but its deeper legacy comes from the way people used it. Teachers used it, parents talked about it, commentators debated its metaphor. Some praised it for making bias understandable to younger audiences. Others questioned whether its predator and prey allegory could carry the full weight of real world discrimination without becoming too simplified. And honestly, both reactions are part of the film's importance. Because a metaphor this broad is always dangerous. It can illuminate, but it can also flatten. It can open a door, but it cannot contain the whole house. Zootopia is at its best when it understands that fear is socially shaped. It is more fragile when its animal biology metaphor gets too close to real human prejudice, because humans are not divided by natural predator instincts. Human bias is based by history, power, storytelling, economics, law, memory, and repetition. Still, the fact that a Disney animated film invited that conversation at all is significant. It gave mainstream audiences, including young viewers, a language for recognizing how assumptions travel, how a kind person can still say something harmful, how institutions can be polite and unfair at the same time, how someone who has been underestimated can, in another situation, underestimate someone else. That last idea is crucial. The film did not make prejudice something that only villains carry, it placed it inside the hero too, and that is why the film feels more honest than a simple message movie. Judy Hopps is not wrong because she is evil. She is wrong because she has absorbed a story about the world without fully realizing it. That is a much more uncomfortable kind of flaw because it is recognizable. By 2016, Disney Animation had also become very skilled at making films that could move across age groups. Frozen had turned emotional self-accents into a global phenomenon. Wreck-It Ralph had used arcade nostalgia to talk about identity and purpose. Big Hero 6 had blended superhero structure with grief and healing. Zootopia takes that same modern Disney confidence and directs it outward towards society itself. And compared to many animated hits of its moment, it feels especially urban. Not just because it is set in a city, but because it thinks like a city. It understands neighborhoods, class signals, public transit, professional hierarchy, workplace humiliation, small town aspiration, downtown anonymity, and the way different communities can live side by side without truly understanding one another. The city is not only a backdrop, it is the film's thesis in concrete and glass. Its second life has also been interesting. In the streaming era, Zootopia became the kind of film people could revisit casually and discover more sharply with each. As a child, you might follow the mystery and laugh at the details. As an adult, you may notice the workplace politics, the media panic, the coded language, the emotional cost of being treated as an exception before being treated as a person. That layered accessibility is why the film has not disappeared into nostalgia. It keeps changing depending on who is watching. So, does it feel timeless or perfectly of its time? The answer is both. It is perfectly of its time because its optimism, its social language, its faith in institutional reform, and even its clean metaphor feel deeply connected to the mid 2010s. But it is timeless because the deeper pattern is older than any decade. A society makes a promise, people believe in it, someone discovers the promise has conditions. Someone else benefits from those conditions staying invisible, and then the story becomes not only about solving a case but about asking whether the promise can survive the truth. That is the lens through which we need to see the film now, not as a flawless allegory, not as a lecture, not as a simple tale about tolerance, but as a bright, funny, beautifully constructed modern fable about how hard it is to become better when fear is easier, faster, and more profitable than understanding. And with that word around it, the film itself finally comes into focus. Zootopia was released in 2016, directed by Byron Howard and Rich Moore, with Jared Bush as co-director. and it stands as one of Disney Animation's most confident attempts to blend pure entertainment with social allegory. On the surface, it is an animated buddy cop mystery set in a world of anthropomorphic mammals. At its heart, though, it is a story about ambition, identity, prejudice, and the painful process of realizing that wanting to be good does not automatically make you free from harm. The film follows Judy Hopps, voiced with bright determination by Ginnifer Goodwin, a small town rabbit from Bunnyborough who dreams of becoming the first rabbit police officer in Zootopia. That detail matters immediately because Judy is not simply chasing a job, she is challenging an entire social imagination. In her world, rabbits are expected to be gentle, safe, productive, and small. They can be loved but not feared, encouraged but not fully respected. So Judy's dream carries more than professional ambition. It carries the ache of every person who has ever been told that their place in the world was already assigned before they even arrived. Opposite her is Nick Wilde, voiced by Jason Bateman, a fox who moves through the city with practiced ease, humor, and emotional distance. Nick is clever, charming, slippery, and wounded in a way he hides so well that his pain first looks like arrogance. The casting is essential here. Bateman brings a dry, controlled rhythm to Nick, a kind of half-smiling intelligence that makes him feel as if he is always 3 steps ahead, not because he loves deception, but because he once learned that being unguarded was too expensive. And between Judy and Nick, the film finds its real pulse. Not in the mystery alone, not in the city alone, but in the friction between two people who think they understand the world because the world has already hurt them in different ways. Judy believes in possibility because she has fought for it. Nick doubts possibility because he once believed in it too and was punished for that belief. Their partnership becomes more than comic contrast. It becomes the film's emotional argument. Progress begins when two people stop using their own pain as the only map of reality. The world they inhabit is one of Disney's most conceptually rich animated spaces. Zootopia is not just a city with animal jokes built into it, it is a full social machine. Sahara Square Tundra Town, Little Rodentia, the Rainforest District, Bunnyborough, and central urban spaces all feel designed around the question of adaptation. How would a society function if its citizens had wildly different bodies, needs, fears, climates, instincts, and histories? How do you build transportation, housing, work, law enforcement, and public life for creatures who are not naturally equal in scale or strength? That is what gives the film its visual pleasure. Every frame seems to ask a practical question and then answer it with imagination. What does a train look like when mice, giraffes, elephants, and rabbits all need access? What does a neighborhood feel like when one accidental step could become a disaster? How does a desk, a doorway, a popsicle, a phone, or a police academy obstacle course change when the world is not built for one standard body? But what makes the design meaningful is that the film refuses to let the city remain only delightful. The architecture says everyone belongs, but the behavior of its citizens says belonging is still conditional. Zootopia is full of accommodations, yet not full of understanding. That gap is where the story lives. Genre is one of the film's smartest tools. Zootopia borrows from noir, police procedurals, conspiracy thrillers, workplace comedies, and classic odd couple storytelling. Judy's investigation gives the film momentum. Nick's involvement gives it texture. The missing mammal's case gives the plot shape, but the mystery is really a delivery system for the theme. Every clue leads outward into the city and inward into the assumptions people carry. The supporting cast adds different shades to that world. Idris Elba gives Chief Pogo a heavy authority that can be funny and intimidating at the same time. Jenny Slate makes Assistant Mayor Bellwether soft-spoken in a way that feels harmless until the film asks us to reconsider what harmlessness can hide. JKK. Simmons gives Maya Lionheart a grand public confidence that fits perfectly in a city built on image. Octavia Spencer brings warmth and worry to Mrs. Waterton. Shakira's ghazal functions almost like the voice of the city's public dream. Glamorous, inclusive, hopeful, and a little distant from the pain below the surface. And this is where the film becomes interesting as a Disney work. Its world is bright enough to welcome you instantly, but its story is structured around disillusionment. Judy enters Zootopia believing that the slogan is true: anyone can be anything. But the film does not simply reward that belief, it tests it. It asks what happens when a dream is real enough to inspire people, but incomplete enough to betray them. Should you watch Zootopia? Yes, but not only because it is funny, beautifully animated, and paced with confidence. You should watch it because it is one of those mainstream films that becomes more revealing when you stop treating accessibility as simplicity. It understands that a children's film can still carry adult anxieties. It understands that a joke can soften the entrance to a difficult idea. It understands that a city can be both a fantasy of coexistence and a map of division. And maybe most importantly, it understands that innocence is not the same as wisdom. Judy begins the film sincere, brave, hardworking, and deeply easy to root for, but sincerity alone cannot save her from the stories she has inherited. Nick begins the film cynical, dishonest, and emotionally unavailable, but cynicism alone cannot erase the vulnerable child he once was. The beauty of Zootopia is that it lets both of them be wrong in ways that make sense. It lets both of them grow, not by becoming completely different, but by becoming more honest. So the film we are entering is not just an animated mystery about a rabbit cop and a fox con artist. It is a story about a world that wants to believe it has moved beyond fear, and two wounded souls who discover that the hardest case to solve is not always the one written in a police file. Sometimes it is the one living quietly inside you. When I first sat with this film, I expected charm. That sounds simple, but it matters. Because with a Disney animated film about a rabbit police officer entering a city of animals, the expectation almost builds itself before the first scene even has a chance to breathe. You expect energy, you expect jokes, you expect visual invention, you expect a world that will be fun to look at, easy to understand, and emotionally safe in the way many studio animations promise safety from the first frame. And Zootopia does give you that. But what surprised me even from the beginning was how quickly the film begins planting discomfort inside the brightness. It opens with a child performing belief. Judy Hopps is young, hopeful, theatrical, and completely sincere. She stands in front of her community and acts out the story of the world as she has been taught to understand it. Once animals were divided by instinct, but now they live together in peace. Predators and prey have evolved beyond the old order. Civilization has replaced fear, harmony has replaced hunger. On the surface, it is adorable. A school performance, costumes, young voices, a tiny rabbit with enormous conviction. But beneath that cuteness, the film is already doing something very careful. It is showing us that every society teaches children a version of history that makes the present feel earned, stable, and morally complete. Judy is not lying. She believes what she is saying. That is what makes the scene more interesting. The film begins with innocence but not with truth. And then the world answers her. Not with cruelty on a grand scale, but with small, familiar forms of correction. Her parents love her, but their love is wrapped in caution. They want her safe, so they ask her to lower the size of her drink. They do not think they are harming her, they are trying to protect her from disappointment. And that is one of the first emotional truths the film understands. Sometimes the people who care about you most can still become the first voice of limitation, not filling lands quietly. Because Judy's dream is not presented as childish fantasy. It is presented as identity. She does not simply want to wear a badge, she wants to prove that the world's categories are not destiny. And from the very beginning, the film makes her smallness visible, not just physically but socially. She is surrounded by people who treat her hope as sweet, inspiring, unrealistic, and slightly embarrassing. That combination is painful because it happens in real life all the time. People will praise your courage while quietly assuming you will fail. The opening atmosphere is bright, but never empty. Bunnyborough feels warm, rural, lovingly crowded, full of family, routine, and agricultural comfort. It is the kind of place that seems built from safety. But even safety has a cost when it becomes a ceiling. Jody's home is not villainous. That is important. The film does not say that small communities are cruel, or that parents are enemies, or that tradition is worthless. It says something more delicate. A loving place can still be too small for the person you are becoming. And then there is the childhood encounter with Gideon Grey, which changes the emotional temperature of the film. Again, the movie keeps things accessible, but it does not make the moment meaningless. Judy sees unfairness. She steps toward it. She pays for that courage. And in that small confrontation, the film gives her dream a scar. Her desire to become an officer is no longer just about ambition. It becomes tied to a memory of powerlessness, to the moment she realized that being right does not always mean being protected. What struck me most is that the film does not let this wound harden her completely. Judy becomes more determined, not more bitter. That is part of her beauty as a character, and also part of her flaw. She believes so strongly in effort that she sometimes underestimates the deeper structures around her. She thinks if she works hard enough, proves herself enough, performs excellence loudly enough, then the world will have no choice but to recognize her. And here is what a few understands. That belief is noble, but it is also incomplete, because excellence does not always erase bias, sometimes it only makes bias change its tone. The police academy sequence makes this idea physical. Judy is not simply training, she is trying to force a world built for larger bodies to make room for her. Every obstacle becomes a visual metaphor for institutional design. The wall is too tall, the ice is too brutal. The strength tests are shaped around assumptions that do not include her. And yet, the sequence is not about her becoming someone else. It is about her learning to move through the world as herself, with strategy, speed, intelligence, and refusal. That is when the film's energy begins to bloom. The rhythm becomes quicker. The music lifts. The editing turns failure into pattern, and pattern into progress. You feel the pleasure of a character earning her place through resilience. But even then, there is a quiet question underneath the triumph. Why must she be extraordinary just to be allowed entry? Think about it this way. Many heroes train because they want to become great. Judy trains because she first has to prove she's not a joke. That difference gives the early film its emotional charge. And when she finally arrives in Zootopia, the film opens like a dream unfolding at impossible scale. The train sequence is one of those moments where animation becomes pure invitation. The city does not appear all at once. It reveals itself in zones, climates, colors, sizes, and rhythms. You feel Judy's wonder because the film lets you share it. For a moment, the promise feels real. Anyone can be anything. The city looks like proof. But the film is too smart to leave the promise untouched. The atmosphere from minute one has been preparing us for contradiction, hope and warning, wonder and limitation, comedy and awe. That is why my first experience with Zootopia felt different from what I expected. I came in expecting a clever animated adventure, and I found a film that was already asking how dreams survive contact with systems, how optimism survives embarrassment, and how a bright city can still cast a long shadow. And by the time Judy steps into the police department, surrounded by officers whose bodies fill the room in ways hers cannot, the film's emotional engine is fully awake. She has reached the place she dreamed of. She has earned the badge. She has entered the city. Now she has to discover what the city actually believes. Judy's first day in Zootopia is one of those sequences that turns achievement into humiliation with almost painful efficiency. She has reached the dream, but the dream does not greet her as an equal. The police department is enormous, loud, heavy with bodies that seem built for force. Rhinos, elephants, buffalo, predators with power in their shoulders and certainty in their walk. Judy enters with the same badge as everyone else, but the room does not treat her that way. It treats her as an exception, a novelty, a symbol, maybe even a mistake. And this is where the story becomes more than a simple underdog tale, because Judy does not fail, because she is incapable. She is pushed into failure by expectation. Chief Bogo does not give her meaningful work. He places her on partner duty, a task that looks harmless from the outside but functions emotionally like a quiet dismissal. It is the institution saying, "You may have entered the room, but we still decide what kind of presence you are allowed to have here." What makes Judy compelling is that she refuses to let even humiliation remain small. If she is given parking tickets, she will issue them with impossible discipline. If the city gives her crumbs, she will organize those crumbs into evidence of worth. It is funny, yes, watching her move through the streets with relentless speed, turning a minor assignment into a personal mission. But there is ache inside the comedy. She is not only doing her job, she is trying to prove that no task can reduce her. That is the first emotional rhythm of the story, Judy turning limitation into fuel. Then she meets Nick Wilde. The first meeting between Judy and Nick is built like a little moral trap, and that is why it works so well. Judy sees what looks like injustice. A fox and a small child being treated with suspicion inside an ice cream shop. She reacts from the best part of herself. She steps in, speaks up, uses her authority to make the world behave more fairly. In that moment, she becomes the officer she imagined she would be. Brave, keen, defiant in the face of prejudice, but the film immediately complicates her goodness. Because Nick is not what he appears to be. The scene turns and Judy realizes she has been used. Her compassion was real, but her judgment was incomplete. Nick's little operation is funny in structure, but emotionally it does something important. It introduces him as a character who has learned how to survive by reading the weaknesses in systems and people. He does not overpower the city, he slips through it. He studies its assumptions, then turns them into currency. This is not simply a scam, it is a worldview. Nick believes everyone is performing a role, so he performs his first. He believes the world sees him as untrustworthy, so he becomes useful through distrust. He believes sincerity is a liability, so he treats Judy's sincerity as something almost childish. And when he explains, without exactly explaining, that animals become what the world expects them to be, the film lets a shadow fall across the comedy. Judy is offended because he sounds cruel. But he is not only being cruel, he is describing the logic that has kept him alive. That is why their dynamic matters. Judy is trying to defeat categories, Nick has surrendered to one. From there, the story begins moving like a mystery, but its emotional journey is really about Judy losing and rebuilding her certainty. She wants a real case, and when Mrs. Odderton enters the police station desperate for help, Judy sees not only a missing mammal investigation, but a chance to finally become useful in the way she always imagined. Her choice to speak up is impulsive, compassionate, and professionally risky. It comes from courage, but also from hunger. She wants to matter so badly that she promises more than she has been permitted to give. The missing mammals case opens the city in a new way. Suddenly, Zootopia is no longer only a beautiful place to explore. It becomes a layered organism with secrets under its fur. Judy pulls Nick into the investigation because she needs him, even if she does not yet respect him. He knows the city differently, not as an idealist, not as a public servant, but as someone who has survived in its corners, learned its habits, and understood that every polished society has backdoors. Their search gives the film its momentum, but also its texture. Each location they move through reveals another version of Zootopia's promise. The DMV sequence turns bureaucracy into comedy so patiently that the joke almost becomes architectural. Little Rodentia transforms scale into suspense. Town gives the film a sharper underworld flavor. The rainforest space brings mystery, atmosphere, and danger. The city becomes less like a postcard and more like a body with hidden nerve. And Judy, moving through it all, begins to learn that being right is not the same as understanding. She is clever, she is brave, she notices details, she acts quickly, but she also carries assumptions she has not examined. The film shows this most clearly through her relationship with Nick. At first, she sees him as a tool, useful, irritating, morally slippery, and temporary. But as the journey continues, the mask begins to slip, not dramatically, not all at once. It happens in small pauses, in flashes of irritation that feel too personal, in the way Nick's humor sometimes arrives half a second before pain can be seen. Then comes the childhood memory that changes how we understand him. The film does not overplay it, and that restraint is important. Nick's wound is not presented as a shocking twist. It is presented as the moment his life narrowed. As a child, he wanted belonging. He wanted to join, to participate, to be seen as more than the story attached to his species. Instead, he was humiliated by other children who had already learned fear before they understood what fear meant. That experience did not simply hurt him, it taught him a rule. If the world is going to see you as a fox, then be the fox it expects. Never let it catch you hoping for anything else. This is one of the film's strongest emotional ideas. Prejudice does not only block opportunity, it can colonize identity. It can make someone participate in the very story that wounded them, because playing the part feels safer than resisting it. Judy hears this, and something in her changes. She begins to see Nick not as an obstacle or a stereotype, but as a person shaped by injury. And because the film is wise enough to let both characters influence each other, Nick also begins to see Judy differently. Her optimism no longer feels merely naive. It begins to feel dangerous in a brave way. She still believes in the world after being dismissed by it. That kind of belief can look foolish until you realize how much strength it requires. The story becomes character driven and word driven at the same time. Judy's need to prove herself pushes the case forward. Nick's knowledge of the city opens doors Judy could never open alone. But the city itself keeps changing the meaning of their choices. Every clue is also a social encounter. Every lead exposes another hierarchy. Every joke carries some small truth about how bodies, reputations, and public roles shape behavior. The pacing is important here. Zootopia moves quickly, but it does not feel empty because each comic set piece doubles as we're building our character pressure. The film rarely pauses for long, yet it keeps smuggling emotional information into motion. That is why the mystery does not need to be the most complex mystery ever written. Its purpose is not only to surprise. Its purpose is to make Judy and Nick walk through enough of the city that the slogan begins to lose its shine. As they get closer to the missing mammals, the tone darkens. The idea of animals going savage begins to circulate through the story like a word people are afraid to say and eager to repeat. Here the film becomes more pointed. Fear needs a shape. A society under pressure often searches for a category it can blame, and once a category is named, everything starts rearranging around it. Faces become threats. Behavior becomes evidence. Old stories wake up. Judy wants to solve the case, but she does not yet understand what solving it will do. That is one of the painful ironies of the film. Her success brings her closer to the very system she wanted to change, and then that system uses her voice in a way she is not ready for. She uncovers something real. She helps find missing animals. She becomes celebrated. The city finally looks at her and sees competence. But recognition arrives at the exact moment her understanding fades. The press conference is the emotional fracture point. Judy stands in front of the city with good intentions, partial information, and inherited fear. She tries to explain what has happened, but her language opens a door she does not know how to close. She suggests a pattern she cannot fully prove. She frames danger in a way that lands on predator bodies collectively, and suddenly the small bias she carried privately becomes public damage. This is where Zootopia is at its most uncomfortable and also its most honest. Judy does not mean to hurt Nick. She does not mean to harm an entire group. She believes she is being responsible. She believes she is sharing what she knows. But impact does not wait for intention to become pure. Her words move through the city faster than her regret can follow. Nick's reaction hurts because the film has earned it. He does not need to shout for the wound to register. He hears in Judy's public explanation the same old story wearing official language. The world has once again told him that underneath everything, he is still something to fear. And the tragedy is that this time, the voice carrying that story belongs to someone he had begun to trust. The separation is not just a friendship breaking, it is Judy's self image breaking. For the first time, she cannot solve the problem by working harder, she cannot outrun what she has done. She cannot issue more tickets, train more intensely, or chase another lead to erase the harm. She has to sit with the fact that she became part of the thing she wanted to fight. And that realization sends her back home, not in triumph, but in shame. Bunny Burrow, when she returns, feels different. The place that once represented limitation now becomes a place of reflection. Judy is no longer the child dreaming upward. She is an adult carrying consequences, and the film allows that post matter. Our parents, her old world, even Gideon Grey reappearing in a changed form, all help her see that people are not frozen forever inside the worst version of themselves. Growth is possible, but growth requires naming the harm honestly. That discoveries her back to Nick, and the apology between them is one of the film's emotional anchors. Judy does not defend herself. She does not ask him to make her feel better. She admits that she was wrong, that her fear shaped her judgment, and that she hurt him. In a film full of movement, this pause matters because it gives the story moral weight. Weber begins not with being forgiven, but with becoming accountable. And Nick's willingness to return does not erase the wound. It shows that trust, once damaged, can still be rebuilt when honesty enters the room. Their partnership becomes deeper after this because it is no longer based only on usefulness, curiosity, or comic chemistry. It is based on the knowledge that both of them have seen something difficult in the other and stayed. From here, the investigation changes. It is no longer Judy chasing validation. It is Judy and Nick trying to understand how fear was created, who benefits from it, and why the city's harmony collapsed so quickly. The mystery tightens. The clues become more dangerous. The story begins moving toward the truth beneath the panic, beneath the headlines, beneath the official explanations. And here is where the film shifts completely. The making of Zootopia feels almost like the making of its city, a huge imaginative construction that only works because the foundation is practical. According to production coverage from SIGGRAPH, the journey began after Byron Howard finished Tangled, when the idea of returning to Disney's tradition of talking animal films started taking shape, with older classics like Bambi, Dumbo, and especially Robin Hood hovering in the background as emotional ancestors. But what matters is not simply that the team wanted animals who walk, talk, and wear clothes. That had been done before. The challenge was to make the old idea feel newly alive, to create a society where animal identity was not decoration but design, behavior, conflict, comedy, and theme. That origin reshapes the way you see the whole film. Zootopia is not just asking, wouldn't animals in a city be funny? It is asking, if animals built civilization without humans, what would civilization reveal about them? That is why the film's best jokes feel structural instead of random. A tiny train door beside a giant one is not only a gag, it is word philosophy. The city has been built around difference, and yet the hearts inside that city have not fully learned what difference means. Reportedly, the filmmakers and artists did extensive animal research at places including the San Diego Zoo Safari Park, Disney's Animal Kingdom, the Wildlife Learning Center, and Kenya, studying real animals closely enough that movement, posture, fur, and group behavior could shape the animation rather than sit on top of it. ACMI also notes that the creative team spent months studying animals, including research connected to zoos, museums, and Kenya, and this changes how we read Judy and Nick in motion. Judy does not move like a small human wearing rabbit ears. Her body carries alertness, bound, speed, and nervous precision. Nick does not simply look like a fox. He occupies space with a loose, sideways confidence that feels both charming and evasive. The research becomes invisible when it works. You stop noticing the craft and start believing the behavior. Another fascinating piece is how much of the film depended on scale. According to SIGGRAPH's production write-up, the team created 70 different animal species, each requiring its own fur or skin treatment. And the filmmakers wanted to preserve meaningful size differences between the smallest and largest mammals. That sounds technical, but it is actually emotional, because scale is one of the film's quietest languages. Jodie is small not only because rabbits are small, but because the world keeps making her feel small. Little Rotting Chair is funny because of danger created by proportion, but it also makes you aware of how fertile coexistence becomes when one citizen's casual movement can become another citizen's catastrophe. The film's physical comedy is constantly whispering about power. Then there is the problem of clothing, fur, and bodies. Cigarettes account notes that clothing animals created unusual challenges, including the question of how garments sit on creatures that do not share human anatomy. The team also had to rethink fur technology, including work connected to Disney's X-Gen system, so that the animals could feel tactile and alive on screen. This is one of those details that seem small until you look again. Nick's shirt, Judy's uniform, Bogo's police presence, Bellwether's soft assistant Mayor styling, all of them depend on the clothes feeling natural to the body beneath them. Costume becomes character. Judy's uniform is almost too big emotionally before it is physically earned. Nick's relaxed wardrobe tells us he has chosen comfort, performance, and distance. Bellwether's softness becomes part of how the film teaches us to underestimate her. The city itself went through a similar process. According to an interview with Byron Howard and Rich Moore, the filmmakers wanted to avoid the lazy version of an animal metropolis where every creature simply lives in a human-looking city with animal faces pasted onto it. The idea of habitat-based districts became crucial. Tundra Town for cold climate animals, Sahara Square for desert animals, the Rainforest District for species who need that environment. Jared Bush's idea of neighborhoods designed around animal comfort helped unlock the world. That one choice reshapes the whole movie. It turns the city from a background into a thesis. Zootopia is not one culture pretending everyone has the same needs. It is a mosaic of environments trying to make coexistence functional. But the brilliance of the film is that functional design does not equal emotional equality. The buildings may accommodate difference, but society still has to learn empathy. According to SIGGRAPH, the environment team also looked at how New York City functions, especially the way people move into a central city for work and return to different neighborhoods to live. That idea helped shape Zootopia's district structure, giving the city the feeling of a real urban organism rather than a fantasy map. The production reportedly involved 155 master sets and more than 3,300 unique elements in the final film, and suddenly the train ride into Zootopia feels different. It is not just a dazzling introduction, it is the film showing you a city designed through research, argument, and practical imagination. Every district says someone thought about how this place would breathe. Even the story form grew from the world. In interviews, the filmmakers discussed how the city concept naturally pushed the film toward a detective procedural because an investigation would allow Judy and Nick to travel through different neighborhoods, meet different citizens, and reveal the fuzzy underbelly beneath the beautiful surface. That is why the mystery structure feels so useful. It is not only there to create suspense, it is there to tour the social body. A chase through Little Rodentia, a visit to Tundra Town, a stop at the DMV, a movement into rainforest shadows. Each place expands the world and tightens the theme. The casting then gives all that design a soul. Ginnifer Goodwin makes Judy's optimism feel almost musical, but never empty. You can hear effort in her brightness. Jason Bateman gives Nick a voice that feels relaxed until you notice how carefully it avoids vulnerability. Idris Elba's Chief Bogo turns authority into mass and pressure. Jenny Slate makes Bellwether sound so harmless that the performance becomes a reminder that danger does not always announce itself loudly. So, when we talk about how Zootopia was made, we are really talking about alignment. Research aligns with design, design aligns with theme aligns with character, character aligns with genre. The film works because its craft keeps asking the same question from different angles. How do bodies, species, histories, and expectations shape the way we see one another? And once you know how much thought went into building this well, the next question becomes even more important. What does the film actually achieve with it? What Zootopia achieves best is balance. That may sound like a modest word for a film this visually alive, but balance is one of the hardest things in storytelling. The film has to be funny without becoming weightless, serious without becoming heavy handed, fast without becoming shallow, moral without becoming flat. It has to build a whole world, introduce a mystery, develop a friendship, make children laugh, keep adults engaged, and still carry an idea complicated enough that the film itself cannot fully solve it. And for most of its running time, it does that with surprising grace. the first achievement is Judy Hopps herself. She could have been written as pure inspiration, the tiny hero who never doubts, never missteps, never becomes part of the problem. But the film gives her something more valuable than perfection. It gives her conviction with blind spots. Ginnifer Goodwin's performance makes Judy bright without making her simple. There is a quickness in the voice, a forward motion, a refusal to sink. You can hear someone who has rehearsed belief for so long that belief has become muscle. The scene that proves Judy most completely is not the moment she succeeds at the academy, though that is satisfying. It is not even the moment she takes control of the missing mammals case. It is the apology to Nick. That is where the character becomes fully human, even in rabbit form, because in that moment her bravery is no longer physical. She is not climbing a wall, chasing a thief, or standing up to a superior. She is doing something harder for a person like Judy. She is admitting that effort did not protect her from being wrong. That is real character writing. A weaker film would let Judy be underestimated and then simply prove everyone wrong. Zootopia does something more difficult. It lets Judy prove herself and still fail morally. It allows achievement and harm to exist in the same character. That is what makes her journey richer. Her arc is not only about becoming a police officer, it is about becoming someone whose idea of justice is larger than her own dream. Nick Wilde is the film's second great achievement, and maybe its most emotionally precise one. Jason Bateman's performance works because Nick's voice always sounds as if it is leaning away from sincerity. He speaks with the ease of someone who has turned distance into style. The comedy comes from his timing, but the sadness comes from how controlled that timing is. Nick rarely sounds surprised, because surprise would mean he expected better from the world. The childhood memory gives the performance its hidden center. After that scene, every smirk feels different, every joke feels like a door closing softly. What this film understands about Nick is that cynicism is not the opposite of hope. Often, cynicism is hope after it has been humiliated. Nick does not lack feeling. He has too much feeling carefully buried under performance. And the beauty of his relationship with Judy is that they do not complete each other in a sentimental way. They correct each other. Judy needs Nick's awareness of the city's hidden rules. Nick needs Judy's refusal to let the word's cruelty become the final truth. Their friendship works because it is not instant harmony. It is fiction slowly becoming trust. The screenplay's strength lies in how efficiently it layers meaning under entertainment. Every major sequence has more than one job. The parking ticket sequence is comedy, but it is also about institutional dismissal. The ice cream scene is a joke about clever fraud, but it is also about how prejudice can be exploited and challenged at the same time. The DMV scene is comic patience stressed almost absurdly, but it also slows the film down just enough to make bureaucracy feel like part of the city's personality. Little Rodentia is scare-based suspense, but it is also a reminder that a shared city is only safe when power remembers gentleness. That is good writing because nothing feels like an isolated sketch. The jokes are not simply attached to the plot, they reveal the world. The mystery itself is not the most complex detective story cinema has ever offered, and it does not need to be. Its structure is clean, legible, and useful. What matters is that the investigation forces Judy and Nick across boundaries. The case becomes a way to travel through class, climate, scale, power, and social fear. Each clue moves the plot forward, but each location also reveals a new pressure inside the city. Visually, the film's achievement is not only beauty, it is clarity. Zootopia is dense with detail, but the frame rarely feels confusing. The directors understand that a world this busy needs strong visual organization. The eye always knows where to go. In wide shots, the city feels grand and impossible. In tighter scenes, character emotion remains readable. That balance lets the film enjoy spectacle without losing intimacy. The city design is especially meaningful because every environment has emotional tone. Bunny Burrow feels warm, crowded, earthy, and familial. It is not a prison, but it is too small for Judy's dream. The police station feels oversized and intimidating, a room where her body becomes the joke before she even speaks. Little Rodentia turns innocence into danger because the word scale changes the moral meaning of movement. Tundra Town carries a colder, sharper noir mood. The rainforest district feels unstable, humid, secretive, and slightly dreamlike. The film keeps using space to tell you what Judy feels before she says anything. That is cinema, not just design, not just color. Emotional architecture. Movement is also one of the film's strongest visual languages. Judy moves with precision and speed, always adjusting, always calculating. Nick moves with looseness as if he refuses to give the world the satisfaction of seeing him try. Chief Pogo barely needs to move at all to communicate authority. Bellwether's smallness is staged differently from Judy's. Judy's smallness has energy. Bellwether's smallness has concealment. The film understands that bodies are stories. And then there is the way the camera frames social discomfort. In the press conference, Judy is placed before microphones, lights, and public attention. It should be her victory image. Instead, the frame becomes a trap. She is elevated but exposed. Her words travel outward, and the film lets you feel how quickly a personal blind spot becomes a civic event. It is one of the film's most effective uses of staging because the scene turns success into consequence without needing melodrama. The score and sound design do equally important work. Michael Giacchino's music gives the film bounce, warmth, mystery, and emotional lift without overwhelming the characters. The city has rhythm. The chase scenes have playful propulsion. The more emotional scenes allow melody to soften rather than command. The score often enters like a current under the image, guiding feeling without forcing it. But silence matters too. Nick's childhood memory has power partly because the film lets humiliation breathe. The apology has power because the sound world pulls back enough for shame and regret to become audible. Even in a film full of comic noise, the quiet moments are where the emotional truth settles. The absence of excess becomes a kind of respect. This is especially important because Zootopia could easily have over-explained itself. Many message-driven films do. They become so anxious that you might miss the point that they keep announcing it. Zootopia sometimes comes close to that danger, but its best scenes trust character emotion more than instruction. Nick's pain teaches us more than a lecture would. Judy's mistake teaches us more than a speech would. The city's panic teaches us more than a simple villain monologue ever could. What the film achieves then is not perfection. It achieves accessibility with bite. It turns a bright animated world into a moral pressure chamber. It gives children a story about friendship and courage, while giving older viewers a story about systems, language, and inherited fear. It creates a heroine who must learn that being underestimated does not make her incapable of underestimating others. It creates a fox whose charm is not decoration but scar tissue. And maybe that is why the film still works. Because beneath all the cleverness, beneath the scale jokes, the animal puns, the chase scenes, and the shining city, Zootopia is about the painful work of seeing clearly. Not just seeing the world, seeing yourself inside it. For a film as fuzzy as Zootopia, its quiet moments matter more than they first appear to. This is a world of movement. Trains, crowds, doors opening and closing, animals of every size crossing through public space, jokes landing quickly, clues arriving with bright momentum. The film often feels like it is in motion even when characters are standing still, because the city itself seems alive around them. But inside that motion, the film keeps making room for pauses. Small ones, careful ones, moments where something is felt before it is explained. And this is where Zootopia becomes more cinematic than its surface energy might suggest. The first kind of silence belongs to Judy. Not literal silence always, but the emotional silence that surrounds being dismissed. When she enters the police department, the comedy comes from contrast, but the deeper feeling comes from the way the room does not truly receive her. No one needs to deliver a long speech about how little they expect from her. The frame says it, her size says it, the heavy bodies around her say it, the assignment she receives says it. Sometimes a society does not need to tell you, add unwelcome. It simply gives you a smaller version of the dream and waits to see whether you will accept it. That is a quiet cruelty, and the film understands it. Judy's face in those early moments often carries the effort of not letting disappointment become visible. That restraint is important. She does not collapse. She does not announce her pain. She turns it into action because that is how she survives humiliation. But the camera lets us notice the space between what she feels and what she allows the world to see. That space is one of the Finn's silent languages. Nick's silence is different. Nick uses words like a shield, so his quiet moments feel almost dangerous. When he is joking, he is safe. When he is teasing Judy, safe. When he is explaining the city's rules with that smooth, casual confidence, safe. But when the Finn takes him back to the childhood memory that shaped him, the performance changes, the pace slows, the image holds, the comedy steps away, and suddenly the fox who always seems in control becomes a child again, surrounded not by physical danger but by humiliation. The film does not need to overstate the wound. In fact, it becomes stronger because it does not. We see enough to understand that something inside him closed. We understand that the smile he wears as an adult is not just personality, it is protection, and what the film chooses not to show is just as important as what it shows. It does not turn that pain into spectacle. It does not linger to punish him again. It gives the moment enough air to explain him, then lets the silence after it do the emotional work. That restraint is rare in a film, just accessible. The apology scene between Judy and Nick carries the same power. It is not staged like a grand dramatic confrontation. It is more open, vulnerable. Judy is not surrounded by the scale of the city anymore. Nick is not performing for a crowd. There is no institution between them, no microphone, no badge protecting her from accountability. Just two characters facing the damage between them, and what makes the scene work is the quiet. Judy's regret needs space, Nick's hurt needs space. Forgiveness, if it comes, cannot feel rushed. The film lets the pause become part of the apology, because real remorse is not only about saying the correct words, it is about allowing the other person's pain to exist without trying to control it. That is what this film communicates without words. That trust has a sound, and so does its absence. The city's silence is also important. When fear spreads through Zootopia, the film does not only show panic through action, it shows it through changed public behavior. The distance between bodies becomes louder. A subway car, a street, an office, a public space. These places feel different when citizens begin watching one another with suspicion. The city that once moved with bright coexistence begins to hesitate. That hesitation is a kind of silence too. Think about what that means. A place can become quieter without becoming peaceful. Silence can be safety, but it can also be fear. It can be the pause before someone crosses the street, the pause before someone speaks, the pause before trust withdraws from a room. Zootopia uses empty space carefully in those moments. The bright fantasy of the city becomes less full, less open. The same architecture that once promised belonging begins to feel fragile. And this is where visual restraint matters. The film does not need to show the entire society collapsing. It only needs to show the emotional temperature changing, a look held too long, a body stepping away, a public statement echoing beyond its speaker's control. That is cinema doing quiet work. Even Bellwether's presence is built on a kind of silence. She's small, soft spoken, easily overlooked. The film uses our own assumptions against us. We do not expect danger from her because the story has trained us, like the city, to associate power with obvious force. But silence can hide ambition. Gentleness can hide resentment. Being underestimated can produce humility, or it can produce a hunger to control the people who never looked closely enough. This does not make smallness suspicious, it makes assumption suspicious. And that is the deeper pattern. Zootopia keeps asking us to notice what is not being said, what Judy does not know she believes, what Nick does not admit he wants, what the city does not confess about itself, what institutions hide beneath polite language, what fear sounds like before it becomes open hostility. For all its color, the fin understands shadow. For all its jokes, it understands pause. And for all its words about anyone becoming anything, its most meaningful moments often happen when language fails and the image has to carry the truth. Because sometimes the loudest thing in a film is not a speech, sometimes it is the moment after one. For everything Zootopia does beautifully, the film is not flawless. And honestly, it becomes more interesting when we admit that. Because a film can be meaningful, ambitious, emotionally smart, and still uneven in the places where its ambition becomes too large for its structure. Zootopia is trying to be many things at once: a buddy comedy, a detective story, a social allegory, a Disney adventure, a city symphony, a character study, and a moral fable about prejudice. Most of the time, that mixture works, but sometimes you can feel the strain. The biggest limitation is the metaphor itself. The predator and prey idea is powerful because it gives the film a clean visual language for fear, suspicion, and social history. It lets younger viewers understand how categories shape treatment. It lets the story traumatize bias without attaching it directly to one real human group. But that same distance also creates problems. In the real world, prejudice is not based on biological predator instinct. Human discrimination is shaped by history, power, law, economics, propaganda, violence, and inherited social narratives. When the film uses natural animal categories to discuss social bias, the metaphor can become too tidy for the pain it is touching. This does not ruin the film, but it does limit it. At its strongest, Zootopia understands that fear is manufactured. It shows how language, media, political ambition, and institutional failure can turn uncertainty into panic. That part feels sharp, but at times the predator pre-framing risks suggesting that fear has some ancient natural logic underneath it, and that is where the allegory becomes fragile. Real prejudice often pretends to be natural, and a film about prejudice has to be careful not to accidentally make that lie feel structurally true. The villain reveal also feels a little too convenient. Bellwether works thematically. Her softness, smallness, and invisibility are important to the film's ideas about being underestimated. The choice to make the overlooked assistant into the hidden manipulator has cleverness behind it. It allows the story to show resentment curdling into control. It also complicates the assumption that danger only comes from obvious power, but dramatically the reveal arrives with less emotional weight than it could have. Bellwether is not developed deeply enough before the twist to make her betrayal feel tragic or psychologically rich. She functions more as a thematic mechanism than a fully textured person. We understand what she represents, but we do not feel her interior life in the way we feel Judy's or Nick's. For a film so interested in how pain shapes identity, the villain's pain remains too thinly drawn, and because of that, the final conspiracy can feel cleaner than the film's earlier social observations. The first two-thirds of Zootopia are most compelling when they suggest that bias is everywhere, not because one villain created it, but because it lives in language, institutions, childhood stories, professional expectations, and casual assumptions. Then the ending gives us a specific plot, a specific scheme, and a specific person to defeat. That is satisfying as a mystery resolution, but it also reduces some of the discomfort. It lets the city breathe again once the culprit is exposed, even though the deeper problem should be harder to repair. This is a common challenge in mainstream storytelling. A film can diagnose a system, but the structure of a family adventure often demands a villain, and when a villain appears, the audience receives relief. The trouble is that prejudice does not end when one manipulator is caught. Fear leaves residue. Public language leaves marks. Trust does not automatically return because the plot has been solved. The film knows this emotionally, but the ending does not have enough time to sit with it. Another place where the film slightly struggles is pacing near the final stretch. The investigation moves with such confidence for most of the movie, but once Judy returns from Bunny Barrow and reconnects with Nick, the story accelerates quickly toward explanation and confrontation. The emotional repair between Judy and Nick is strong, but the city's repair is much faster and less complicated. We get the feeling of healing without always feeling the cost of healing. There are also supporting characters who feel more functional than fully explored. Chip Pogo is entertaining and useful, but his shift in how he sees Judy could have carried more emotional specificity. Mayor Lionheart is effective as a symbol of image-conscious authority, but the film does not go very far into the moral ambiguity of his choices. Even Mrs. Otterton, whose desperation helps launch the case, becomes more plot catalyst than living presence. These are not fatal flaws. They are the natural pressure points of a film trying to remain brisk and accessible while carrying serious ideas. but they matter because the film's best parts make you want more depth. Once Zootopia proves it can be thoughtful, you begin to notice where it chooses speed over complexity. And still, I do not think these flaws break the experience. They reveal the boundary of what the film can hold. Zootopia is not a complete theory of prejudice. It is not a perfect political allegory. It is not a deep institutional drama disguised as animation. It is a Disney fable with enough intelligence to open the door to harder conversations, and that distinction matters. The film's sweetness is that it cannot fully carry the weight of the world it gestures toward. Its strength is that it gestures toward that world at all. So, where does the film fall? It falls when its metaphor becomes too neat. It falls when its villain becomes too useful. It falls when social repair arrives faster than emotional truth would allow. But it rises in the way it asks the questions, in the way it lets its hero be wrong, and in the way it understands that a bright world can still have shadows under the surface. And those shadows lead us directly into what the film is really saying. What Zootopia is really saying is that fear does not need to be true to become powerful. It only needs to feel useful. That is the dark little engine under the film's colorful surface. The city does not collapse because everyone suddenly becomes cruel. It collapses because fear gives people a shortcut. A shortcut for understanding strangers, a shortcut for explaining danger, a shortcut for turning uncertainty into a story with clear sides. And once that story begins to move through public life, it becomes very hard to slow down. This is why the film's central idea still matters. It understands that prejudice is not always born from hatred in its loudest form. Sometimes it begins as caution. Sometimes it begins as a private discomfort someone never questions. Sometimes it begins as an old family warning, a childhood lesson, a joke repeated too many times, a headline framed in a particular way. By the time it becomes visible, it has often already been living quietly inside ordinary language. Judy's journey is so important because she begins as someone who has suffered from assumptions. She knows what it feels like to be underestimated. She knows what it feels like to be treated as symbolic rather than capable. She knows the frustration of entering a room where people smile at your dream while already deciding its limits. And yet, even with that pain inside her, she still carries assumptions about others. That is the film's most mature insight. Being wounded does not automatically make someone wise. Being excluded does not automatically make someone incapable of excluding. Pain can make us more empathetic, but only if we allow it to. If we do not examine it, pain can also make us protective, defensive, and blind in new ways. Judy has a good heart, but a good heart is not the same thing as a clean imagination. The film keeps returning to that distinction. Nick, on the other hand, represents the cost of becoming what the world insists you are. His life is shaped by a story told about him before he has any chance to answer it. As a child, he wants to belong. As an adult, he has turned not belonging into a performance. His charm is not freedom, it is adaptation. He has learned that if people are going to expect a fox to be dishonest, then he can at least control the terms of that dishonesty. And this is where the film becomes quietly painful. Nick's cynicism is not framed as simple weakness. It is framed as service that has overstayed its purpose. At some point, the armor that protects you also begins to limit you. It keeps out cruelty, but it also keeps out trust. It prevents surprise, but it also prevents hope. So Judy and Nick are not opposites in a simple way. They are two responses to the same world. Judy responds to limitation by trying to prove the world wrong. Nick responds to limitation by pretending the world was right all along. One fights the label, one wears it before anyone else can throw it at him. And the film's emotional power comes from watching both of them discover that neither strategy is enough on its own. Simplicity itself is the largest symbol. Zootopia is not only a setting, it is an idea built from concrete, glass, water, snow, heat, tunnels, lights, and crowds. Its design says coexistence is possible. Its social behavior says coexistence is fragile. That contrast is the film's real subject. As society can create inclusive structures and still fail at inclusive film. It can celebrate difference in public and still fear difference in private. It can build many doors and still decide who belongs behind them. The train that carries Judy into the city feels like an arrival into possibility. Every district says, look, the world can be arranged to make room, but as the story deepens, that same city becomes a map of conditional acceptance. You may be welcome as long as you are useful, as long as you are harmless, as long as you do not disturb the deeper story people carry about what you are. That is why the recurring idea of anyone can be anything becomes more complicated the longer the film goes on. At first, it sounds like liberation. Later, it sounds like a promise with missing footnotes. Anyone can be anything, but some must work harder to be believed. Anyone can be anything, but some are forgiven faster than others. Anyone can be anything, but the world still has habits, and those habits do not disappear because the slogan is beautiful. The film is not rejecting the dream that matters. Zootopia is not cynical. It does not say the promise is meaningless. It says the promise must be earned again and again by behavior, policy, humility, apology, and repair. Hope is not the opposite of criticism. Sometimes criticism is what hope looks like when it becomes serious. The night howler flower becomes one of the film's clearest symbols because it reveals how fear can be engineered. The panic around predators is not simply natural, it is activated, manipulated, staged. Something external enters the body and changes behavior, and then society misreads that behavior as proof of an old story. That is an elegant metaphor for how prejudice often works. First, conditions are traded. Then the affected people are blamed for reacting to those conditions. The cause disappears and the stereotype remains. Think about it this way. The city does not ask what happened to them quickly enough. It asks, what are they? That is the dangerous shift. A question about circumstance becomes a claim about identity. And once identity becomes the explanation, empathy begins to shrink. Bellwether's plan depends on that shrinkage. She understands that fear can reorganize power. She knows that if enough citizens feel threatened, they will accept division as protection. Her villainy is not only personal resentment, it is the political use of anxiety. She turns an old social tension into a ladder, and the fact that she does this while appearing harmless is part of the point. Power is not always loud. Sometimes it whispers into an existing wound. The film's motifs keep circling back to visibility. Judy wants to be seen as capable. Nick wants to stop being seen through suspicion. Bellwether resents not being seen at all. The missing mammals become invisible in a different way, hidden away because the city would rather manage the appearance of crisis than face its cause honestly. Again and again, the film asks what happens when seeing is replaced by assuming, and that connects to something deeply human. We all want to be understood beyond the easiest version of ourselves, beyond category, beyond reputation, beyond first impression, beyond the story someone else finds convenient. The film's emotional force comes from this very simple longing to be looked at closely enough that the truth has a chance. That is why the friendship between Judy and Nick becomes the answer. The city has not yet learned. They do not become friends because they are the same. They become friends because they begin correcting the false stories they carry about each other. Judy learns that Nick's cleverness has a wound beneath it. Nick learns that Judy's optimism has courage beneath it. Neither one is reduced to the role the world handed them. This is what the film understands about real connection. It is not built from perfect first impressions. It is built from revision, from the willingness to say, I was wrong about you, I did not see enough. I let a known story stand where your personhood should have been. That is a quiet, beautiful idea, and maybe that is why Zootopia continues to resonate, not because it solves prejudice, it does not. Not because its metaphor is flawless. It is not, but because it captures the emotional shape of bias in a way many people can feel. The way it enters a room before anyone speaks, the way it changes posture, the way it turns a stranger into a threat, a dream into a burden, a mistake into evidence, a whole group into a headline. But the film also believes in repair, not easy repair, not instant repair, the kind that begins when someone stops defending the image of themselves as good and starts doing the harder work of becoming honest. That is what Zootopia is really saying. A better world is not built by pretending fear is gone. It is built by noticing when fear is speaking through us and choosing with humility not to let it have the final word. The signature behind Zootopia is not the signature of one isolated author. It is the signature of a studio system working at a high level, guided by filmmakers who understand that animation can carry delight and difficulty in the same breath. Byron Howard, Rich Moore, and Jared Bush bring different instincts into the film, and you can feel that mixture in the final shape. Howard's connection to Disney's classic animal storytelling gives the film its warmth, elegance, and affection for character design. Moore's background with sharp comic timing and worlds built around systems gives the film much of its speed, wit, and structural playfulness. Bush's story instincts help sharpen the social mechanism, the mystery shape, and the way each piece of world building has narrative purpose. To me, that you are just starting is not simply visual charm. It is organized imagination. That is what separates Zootopia from a film that merely has a clever premise. The filmmakers do not stop at the idea of animals living like humans. They keep asking what that idea would change. What would a police academy look like? What would public transit require? How would neighborhoods form? What would prejudice sound like in a world where predator and prey history still sits under everyday politeness? The film's creativity is not random decoration. It is cause and effect. This connects deeply to modern Disney animation's broader creative identity. In its strongest recent era, the studio became fascinated with characters who live inside worlds that are beautiful but incomplete. Rapunzel wants the world beyond the tower. Ralph wants to be seen as more than the role his game assigns him, as the struggles against the image others fear and the power she cannot easily control. Hero must move through grief by letting love become purpose. Judy Hopps belongs in that lineage because she is also trying to step beyond the role written for her. But Zootopia pushes that Disney pattern outward. In many Disney films, the emotional struggle begins inside the character and then reshapes the world around them. Here, the world itself is part of the wound. Judy's inner dream is inseparable from the society that doubts her. Nick's emotional armor is inseparable from the prejudice that marked him early. The city is not merely the stage for their growth, it is the machine that produced their fears. That is the filmmaker's real signature here, the ability to turn environment into character psychology. Howard and Moore frame Zootopia as a place of wonder first, because wonder is necessary. If the city did not seduce us, its failure would not hurt. We need to believe in the dream before the film starts questioning it. We need the train ride, the scale jokes, the districts, the color, the sense of endless possibility. Only then can the film slowly reveal that a place can be beautifully designed and morally unfinished. This is a very Disney contradiction, but made sharper. Disney has always been drawn to wish fulfillment. A dream, a song, a transformation, a doorway into a larger life. Zootopia honors that tradition through Judy's arrival, her badge, her belief in becoming something no one expected. But the film also interrogates the wish. What happens after the dream comes true? What if the place you dreamed of still does not know how to see you? What if your own dream of fairness is infected by unfairness you did not recognize? That is where the film feels like both a continuation and a departure. It continues Disney's love of outsiders, dreamers, comic companions, expressive words, and emotional clarity. But it departs from simpler moral structures by making the hero's goodness insufficient. Judy is not wrong because she lacks courage. It is wrong because courage without self-examination can still cause damage. That is a more mature lesson than many animated adventures are willing to carry. Moore's influence can be felt in the film's system-based comedy. Like Wreck-It Ralph, Zootopia enjoys words with rules. It finds humor in infrastructure, work culture, bureaucracy, and social roles. The DMV joke works not only because the sloths are slow, but because the entire institution becomes a comic machine. The city's logic becomes the joke. But the same love of systems also allows the film to explore how systems quietly shape behavior. Howard's influence can be felt in the softness of character appeal. Judy's animated with enormous emotional readability. Nick's design carries charm without losing slyness. Even side characters often have a rounded tactile warmth that makes the world feel approachable. That warmth matters because the film is dealing with ideas that could become harsh or abstract. The character appeal keeps the allegory human, even when the bodies are animal. Bush's contribution is strongly felt in the way the screenplay keeps pulling theme through plot. The case does not wander away from the meaning. Each turn brings Judy closer to a larger understanding of the city and herself. The film's best structure choice is that the mystery is not separate from the social commentary. The mystery is how the commentary becomes visible. Watching Zootopia teaches us that these filmmakers see animation as a space where complexity must remain legible. They are not trying to make ambiguity so dense that the story loses emotional access. They are trying to build a bridge. A child can follow the case, an adult can feel the social tension underneath, a casual viewer can enjoy the jokes. A deeper viewer can return to the frame and find the architecture of the metaphor waiting there, and that may be the most meaningful signature of the film. It believes clarity is not the enemy of depth. Cinema rarely does this gracefully. Many films become simple when they try to be clear or become cold when they try to be complex. Zootopia is not perfect, but its best moments understand that a story can hold your hand while still leading you toward discomfort. It can welcome you with color, then ask you to look at fear. It can make you laugh, then make you recognize yourself. That is the artistic mind behind the frame. Generous, clever, warm, and quietly uneasy about the world it has built. And once you understand that signature, the rewatch becomes even more revealing. The first time you watch Zootopia, you follow the case. The second time, you follow the assumptions. That is where the film changes. On a first viewing, the mystery pulls your attention forward. You are watching Judy chase clues, watching it become involved, watching the city open district by district. The pleasure is discovery. But on rewatch, the pleasure becomes recognition. You start noticing how early the film plants the emotional evidence, not only for the case but for the characters themselves. Judy's childhood performance feels different once you know where the story goes. At first, it looks like a charming introduction to the Wilde's history. On rewatch, it becomes almost ironic. A child confidently narrates social harmony before she has lived long enough to understand how fragile that harmony is. She believes the city's promise before she has ever had to test it. And because we know she will later repeat a harmful assumption in public, the innocence of that opening becomes more complicated. You also notice how carefully the film frames her parents. They are loving, funny, and cautious, but their language carries little inherited fears. They do not see themselves as prejudiced. They see themselves as practical. That distinction becomes sharper the second time because you understand how the film is tracing bias through ordinary care. The warning is not shouted, it is passed down softly, disguised as protection. Nick changes even more on rewatch. The first time, his smoothness is entertaining. He feels like the clever fox in the story because he is playing exactly the role the story expects. But once you know about his childhood wound, everything in his early behavior carries an ape underneath. His confidence looks more defensive, his jokes feel more rehearsed, his refusal to take Judy seriously feels less like simple arrogance and more like someone trying to prove that hope is always naive before hope can prove him wrong. That is the strongest rewatch layer in the film. Nick is performing a stereotype because he was injured by one. And the second time through, you can see how exhausting that performance must be. The ice cream shop scene becomes richer too. Judy thinks she is correcting prejudice, and in one sense she is. But she's also being manipulated because her moral confidence is still too clean. Nick understands that people want to feel righteous, and he uses that. On rewatch, the scene is funny, but also quietly uncomfortable. Judy is doing the right thing for incomplete reasons, and Nick is doing the wrong thing for reasons rooted in pain. The film keeps setting up these little reversals. Judy is underestimated, so we naturally align with her. Nick is suspicious, so we naturally question him. Bellwether is ignored, so we naturally pity her. Mayor Lionheart is powerful, so we naturally distrust him. On rewatch, you realize the film has been training you to examine your own shortcuts while also using those shortcuts to tell the story. That is clever, Maybe a little too neat at times, but clever. The details of the city also become more meaningful once you already know the ending. The world's beauty starts to look like a surface under pressure. The districts are still dazzling, but you begin to notice the separation inside the design. Everyone belongs in Zootopia, but often in carefully managed zones. The city accommodates difference, but accommodation is not the same as intimacy. Coexistence can be engineered in public space while distrust survives in private thought. The missing mammals case also plays differently. The first time, the word around their condition creates suspense. The second time, it creates unease because you know that the city is going to misread what is happening. You watch misinformation gather shape. You watch fear waiting for language. You watch Judy move closer to a truth she is not yet mature enough to explain. That press conference becomes painful on rewatch because you can see the disaster forming before she does. Judy believes he is being responsible. She believes he is helping. But the framing, the microphones, the public pressure, and the partial signs of her explanation all become warning signs. The scene hurts more because the film has already shown us Nick's wound. We know exactly what kind of old fear her words will awaken in him, and Bellwether becomes more visible too, the first time she blends into the background by design. On rewatch, her small acts of helpfulness feel more strategic. Her softness begins to look like camouflage. The film invites us to reconsider how quickly we equate quietness with innocence. Not because quiet people are dangerous, but because our assumptions about power are often too visual. We expect threat to look large, loud, and obvious. The film hides threat in the place we are least trained to inspect. Does Zootopia gain power once the surprise is gone? Mostly yes. The mystery itself becomes less exciting because its final shape is already known, but the character warp becomes stronger. The emotional clues become easier to see. Judy's blind spots, Nick's armor, the city's fragile promise, the villain's manipulation of public fear, all of these become clearer when you are no longer rushing toward the answer. The best rewatch films are not only built on twists, they are built on patterns. And Zootopia has patterns everywhere. Size and power, softness and danger, performance and danger, public harmony and private suspicion, hope and harm. The first viewing asks what happened, the second asks why everyone was ready to believe it. That is why the film remains rewarding. Its surprises may belong to the first watch, but its meaning belongs to the return. Zootopia belongs to a very old cinematic family. Long before Disney built its bright mammal metropolis, storytellers had been using animals to talk about people. That tradition goes back far beyond cinema, into fables, folklore, myths, children's literature, political satire, and moral tales where animal behavior becomes a safer way to examine human weakness. A fox can carry cleverness, a rabbit can carry vulnerability, a lion can carry authority, a sheep can carry softness. These associations are simple enough to understand instantly, but flexible enough to become surprisingly complex when a storyteller begins twisting them. Disney itself has a long history with this language. Think of the emotional naturalism of Bambi, the circus melancholy of Dumbo, the aristocratic charm of the Aristocats, and especially the playful outlaw energy of Robin Hood. Those earlier films understood animal characters as emotional shortcuts. You see the species, and before the story explains anything, you already feel a type of personality, a rhythm, a place in the world. Zootopia inherits that tradition, but it also modernizes it. In Robin Hood, the fox carries romantic mischief and moral rebellion. In Zootopia, the fox carries something more wounded. Meek Wilde is still charming, still clever, still slippery in the classic fox tradition, but the film asks why he became that way. It takes an old archetype and gives it social memory. The fox is not simply tricky because foxes are tricky. He is tricky because the world told him that was all he could be, and eventually he turned the accusation into a costume. That is how art inherits and transforms. Judy Hopps also comes from a familiar storytelling line. The small hero entering a large world, the dreamer who refuses the boundaries of home, the underdog whose body becomes part of the obstacle. Cinema has always loved that shape because it is emotionally immediate. We understand a person who walks into a room too large for them and refuses to leave. But Zootopia sharpens that old heroic structure by placing it inside institutional life. Judy is not trying to win a tournament or break a curse. She is trying to function inside a workplace that treats her presence as symbolic before it treats her as professional. That gives the underdog story a modern edge. The film also clearly draws energy from detective cinema. Not in a dark adult, full innocence, but in the architecture of investigation, the city with secrets, the unlikely partnership, the missing persons case, the trail of clues across neighborhoods, the powerful figure hiding information, the underworld encounter, the public story that does not match the private truth. Zootopia takes these familiar crime film bones and softens them just enough for a Disney frame, while keeping the pleasure of discovery intact. You can feel the influence of buddy cop cinema too. Two mismatched characters forced into partnership, one earnest, one cynical, one load-bound, one streetwise. One believes in the system, one understands the system's cracks. That formula has powered countless films because it creates instant friction. But here, the formula is not only comedic. Judy and Nick are mismatched because they represent two different relationships to the city's promise. She believes the promise has been denied to her but can still be claimed. He believes the promise was never meant for him. So the genre becomes emotional. There is also a conversation here with city films more broadly. Cinema has often treated the city as a living force, beautiful, dangerous, lonely, crowded, full of opportunity and indifference at the same time. Zootopia joins that conversation in animated form. Its city as the wonder of a fantasy kingdom, but the logic of a modern metropolis, commuters, districts, bureaucracy, political image making, media panic, class coded spaces, hidden economies, public performance. The city is not just where the story happens, it is the thing the story is trying to understand. And then there is the influence of animated worlds that hide adult seriousness beneath accessible surfaces. Films like Who Framed Roger Rabbit showed how a cartoon world could sit beside an atmosphere, social tension, and mystery structure. Modern animation, especially in the years before Zootopia, had also become increasingly comfortable, layered storytelling, bright enough for children, but emotionally and culturally aware enough for adults. Zootopia stands in that lane, using charm as an invitation rather than an escape. What it says that earlier films often did not is this: the fantasy world itself can be progressive in design and still prejudiced in behavior. That is the newer idea. Many older animal stories use species as personality. Zootopia uses species as social expectation. Many older animated cities exist to dazzle. Zootopia exists to dazzle and then implicate. Many older buddy stories bring opposites together because difference is funny. Here, difference is funny, but also painful, political, and deeply tied to memory. This is why the film feels both classic and contemporary. It knows the warmth of old Disney animal storytelling. It knows the rhythm of crime cinema. It knows the pleasure of mismatched partners. It knows the visual seduction of a city that seems impossible, but it takes those inherited pieces and arranges them around a question that belongs urgently to modern life. What if the story a society tells about itself is kinder than the society itself has learned to be? That is the cinema before Zootopia. A chain of fables, animal comedies, sitting mysteries, buddy investigations, Disney dreams, and noir shadows, all leading to a film where a rabbit and a fox walks through a beautiful city and discover that the hardest mystery is not who committed the crime. It is where everyone was ready to believe the wrong story. From this moment, we go into full spoilers. If you have not yet seen this film, stop here, go experience it first, and come back. Some things deserve to be felt before they are understood. The truth at the center of Zootopia is not simply that predators are going savage. The truth is that someone wants the city to believe they are. That distinction changes everything. Because for most of the film, the mystery seems to be moving toward a biological explanation, some frightening return of old instinct that threatens the entire idea of civilization. The missing mammals have not merely disappeared. They have changed, or appear to have changed, in ways that terrify the city, because the change seems to confirm its oldest fear. Predators, beneath the manners and clothes and laws, might still be dangerous. The modern world might only be a costume over something primitive. And that is exactly the story Bellwether needs the city to accept. The film's deepest twist is not only that Bellwether is behind the conspiracy, it is that she understands narrative. She understands that people do not need full truth when fear gives them a simpler one. If enough predators become violent in public or are discovered in a state that looks uncontrollable, the city will do the rest of the work for her. Citizens will whisper, news will frame, institutions will react, the old division between predator and prey will return, not because it is true, but because it is familiar. Bellwether's plan works because Zootopia's harmony was never as stable as it looked. The missing mammals case begins with individual grief. Mrs. Otterton is not asking for a political revelation. She is asking for her husband. That is important because the film starts the mystery at the level of love. One family has been broken by absence. One person has vanished from ordinary life. Before the case becomes a city-wide crisis, it is a private wound, and Judy's instinct to help her is sincere. This is Judy at her best, moved by someone else's pain, willing to risk her position because the institution is too ready to move slowly. But as Judy and Nick follow the trail, every turning point widens the case beyond the personal. They discover that Emmett Otterton's disappearance is connected to a larger pattern. They trace him through the limo, through Mr. Big, through the account of what happened in Thunder Town. They learn that Manchas, the driver, was attacked after Otterton changed. Then Manchas himself becomes affected, turning a witness into another piece of evidence the city can misread. What the film does well in these moments is make fear feel contagious. Judy and Nick are not only chasing facts, they are chasing a story before it becomes public belief. At first, they think they are uncovering a hidden illness or some biological regression. But the deeper they go, the more the film prepares us for a different truth. This is not nature. This is manipulation. Mayor Lionheart's role complicates the mystery. He has discovered the missing predators and hidden them away, not to harm them, but to protect the image of the city and search for answers outside public panic. His choice is morally compromised. He is not the real villain, but he is still part of the problem. He thinks secrecy can hold the city together. He believes he can control the truth until it becomes manageable. And that is exactly how institutions often fail in stories like this. They hide the frightening thing, hoping concealment will prevent fear, but concealment only deepens the eventual damage. Lionheart's hidden facility becomes one of the film's major turning points because it reveals the missing mammals alive, frightened, and trapped inside a system that does not know what to do with them. The scene is unsettling not because it is graphic, but because it shows how quickly protection can resemble imprisonment when fear governs the response. These predators are not being understood, they are being contained. And then Judy gets what she wanted. She solves the case publicly, or at least seems to. She is celebrated. She is promoted from symbolically crude to real hero in the eyes of the city. The same world that underestimated her now holds microphones in front of her. But the tragedy is that her victory is incomplete, and because it is incomplete, it becomes dangerous. At the press conference, Judy tries to explain a pattern without understanding its cause. She speaks from partial knowledge, and her words give the city a category to fear. She suggests that predators may have something inside them, something biological, something that could explain what is happening. She does not intend to condemn Nick. She does not intend to divide the city, but intention cannot control consequence once language enters public space. This is the film's most painful twist before the actual villain reveal. Judy becomes the voice that spreads the fear Bellwether needs. Nick's reaction is devastating because it brings his childhood wound back into the present. He hears Judy, someone he trusted, framing predators through the same old suspicion that once humiliated him. For him, this is not a theoretical mistake. It is personal history repeating itself in official language. The person who helped him believe the world might be better has just reminded him how quickly it can return to its worst assumptions. Their separation is the emotional low point of the film. The city fractures around them, but the friendship fractures first. That is why the social collapse feels intimate. The film does not ask us to understand division only through crowds and headlines. It asks us to feel it between two people who had begun to see each other clearly. Judy's resignation is crucial. She does not simply feel sad. She recognizes that the badge, the symbol she fought her whole life to wear, has become connected to harm. Returning home is not defeat in the usual heroic sense. It is accountability before she knows what accountability can repair. She cannot keep enjoying the dream while ignoring what her success helped unleash. And then the film gives her one of its most important revelations through Gideon Grey and the Night Howler flower. This is a smart narrative choice because it brings Judy's childhood back into the case. Gideon, once the local bully who hurt her, has changed. He is awkward, apologetic, and no longer trapped inside the worst moment of his youth. His presence reminds Judy that identity can transform. People are not only what fear once made them, and through him she learns that night howlers are not wolves as she assumed, but flowers capable of causing dangerous behavior effects. That small misunderstanding matters. Judy misheard, misread, and built a conclusion around an assumption. The personal lesson and the plot lesson become the same thing. She has been wrong before because she moved too quickly from pattern to meaning. When Judy returns to Nick, the apology is not just a friendship scene, it is the moral hint of the film. She admits she was ignorant. She admits she was afraid. She admits she hurt him. And she does not demand immediate forgiveness as proof that she is still good. That is why the scene feels earned. She is not trying to escape guilt. She is trying to become honest enough to deserve trust again. Nick's choice to help her is generous but not naive. He is not pretending the wound never happened. He is choosing to believe that people can be more than the harm they caused when they truly face it. That belief is the film's answer to cynicism, not blind optimism. Deeper. Together, Jody and Nick follow the Night Howl trail to the hidden operation where the flowers are being processed into a substance used to target predators. Doug and the ram workers are part of the machinery, but Bellwether is the mind behind the social design. The goal is not chaos for its own sake. The goal is political power. If prey citizens become afraid enough, they will unite behind someone who claims to protect them. And here Bellwether becomes most chilling, not because she is physically intimidating, but because she understands resentment. She has lived as someone ignored beside larger figures. She knows how invisibility can curdle, but instead of turning that pain into solidarity with others who are dismissed, she weaponizes it. She wants power through division. She wants to reverse hierarchy, not heal it. The museum climax brings the film's ideas into one final image. Judy and Nick are surrounded by exhibits of the old world, the violent past that Zootopia claims to have overcome. That setting matters. The city's history is literally around them as Bellwether tries to drag it back into the present. When Nick appears to turn on Judy after being hit with a serum, Bellwether thinks the old story has won, a predator attacking prey, a perfect image for public fear. But Judy and Nick have learned the power of performance too. Their fake-out turns Bellwether's own method against her. She believes she is recording proof of predator danger, but instead she records herself exposing the truth. It is satisfying because the victory is not only physical. Judy and Nick defeat the lie by controlling the story long enough for truth to be heard. The ending restores order, but not in a way that should be read as simple magic. Bellwether is arrested. The cause of the savage behavior is revealed. The affected mammals can be treated. Nick joins the police force. Judy continues serving, now with a deeper understanding of justice. The city begins to heal. But what the film leaves beneath the celebration is the knowledge that Zootopia's promise has been damaged and must be rebuilt with more humility than before. There is no major post-credit scene that changes the story's meaning. Their credits lean into celebration, music, and the public joy of the city coming together again. That choice fits the Disney shape of the film. After anxiety, it gives release. After division, it gives rhythm. After suspicion, it gives shared space. But the emotional ending belongs to Judy and Nick in the patrol car. Their partnership has transformed. Judy is no longer the innocent believer who thinks effort alone can redeem the world. Nick is no longer the wounded cynic who thinks the world cannot surprise him. They are still funny together, still teasing, still different. But now their difference carries trust. They have moved from stereotype to friendship, from usefulness to recognition, and that is the real ending of Zootopia. Not the villain being caught, not the city being saved, not even Nick putting on the uniform. The ending is the idea that seeing someone clearly is an act of justice. Jody and Nick do not solve every social wound in Zootopia. They cannot. No one friendship can repair an entire city, but their relationship becomes a small proof of what repair looks like when it begins honestly. They were both wrong about each other. Then they looked again, and sometimes in a world built on fear, looking again is where hope starts. What Zootopia left behind in me is not one joke or one chase or even one perfect piece of world building. It is the look between Judy and Nick after trust has been broken. That is the moment I keep returning to because it feels bigger than the film around it. A rabbit and a fox standing inside the wreckage of a friendship that had only just begun to become real. No grand tragedy in the visual sense. No huge disaster in the frame, just the quiet recognition that someone you trusted has repeated the world's old story about you and maybe did not even understand what they were doing until the wound had already opened. There is something painfully familiar in that, because many of us know what it feels like to be misunderstood by strangers. That kind of pain can harden into expectation. You learn to prepare for it. You learn the shape of it. You build your defenses before the word arrives. But being misunderstood by someone who has seen you closely, someone who has laughed with you, moved with you, depended on you, that is different. That cuts deeper because it does not feel like ignorance from a distance. It feels like a door closing from inside the room. Nick's heart stays with me because the film lets it be quiet. He does not need to explain every layer of what Judy's words have done. We already know. We saw the child he was. We saw the hope that was humiliated out of him. We saw the way he turned expectation into performance. So when Judy's language places him back inside the same old fear, the film does not have to overstate anything. It trusts us to feel the return of that childhood wound, and Judy's shame stays with me too because it is not comfortable shame. It is not the kind of guilt a story uses just to make a hero seem sensitive. It is the shame of a person realizing that goodness is not a permanent identity. You do not become good once and then remain untouched by harm. You have to keep choosing attention, keep choosing humility, keep checking the stories inside you. Judy learns that her badge cannot protect her from being wrong. Her dream cannot protect her from causing pain. Her sincerity cannot undo impact. That is a difficult thing for a warm film to say. And maybe that is why I respect Zootopia more than I love it without reservation. It is not perfect. Its metaphor has limits. Its ending repairs the city faster than real life repairs anything. But somewhere inside its polished Disney shape, there is a truth that feels honest. People are not only divided by hatred. Sometimes they are divided by unexamined fear, by careless language, by the assumption that being kind means we no longer need to be careful. That idea changed the way I see the film. When I first watched it, I admired the cleverness, the city, the design, the pairing of Judy and Nick, the way the film could make a sloth joke last exactly long enough to become unforgettable. But what remained after the color faded was the film's gentler warning: do not confuse a beautiful promise with a finished world. That applies beyond Zootopia. It applies to any room where people say the right things, but still make space unevenly. Any workplace that celebrates difference but treats some people as symbols. Any friendship where old assumptions hide beneath affection. Any society that thinks progress is proven by its slogans instead of its behavior. The film made me think about how often we ask people to prove they are more than the story attached to them. Judy has to prove she is more than small. Nick has to prove he is more than suspicious. Bellwether twists her own invisibility into harm because she cannot imagine recognition without domination. Even the city itself has to prove it is more than its slogan. That is what lingers. Everyone is trying to escape a story, and not everyone escapes cleanly. Would I return to Zootopia? Yes, not because it is flawless, but because it remains alive. It still has speed, humor, texture, and emotional intelligence. It still rewards attention. It still lets you enter through joy and leave with something more thoughtful than you expected. It is the kind of animated film that can sit in two places at once, bright enough for comfort, sharp enough for reflection. And I think the person who will carry this film with them is someone who understands what it means to be underestimated, but also someone willing to ask a harder question. Where have I underestimated someone else? That is where the film becomes personal. It does not simply let us stand with Judy against the world. It eventually asks us to stand with Judy against the unfinished parts of herself, and that is a braver emotional move than it first appears. Because the easiest stories tell us we are good because we have been hurt. The better stories remind us that being hurt is not the end of our responsibility. So, what Zootopia left behind in me is a small act of attention. Look again at the person you reduced too quickly, at the joke you thought was harmless, at the fear you inherited, at the dream you believed was already complete. Look again, because the world is always more complicated than the first story we are given. And sometimes the most honest thing cinema can do is not give us a perfect answer, but teach us to pause before accepting the easiest one. Or main movements complete. Type outro when you are ready for the ending. So the final thought on Zootopia is this. It is a brighter film than its subject, and that brightness is part of why it works. A harsher version of this story might have pushed deeper into the pain of division. A more adult version might have refused the clean comfort of resolution. But Zootopia is not trying to be that kind of film. It is trying to do something slightly different, and in some ways more difficult. It is trying to create a story that can be entered by almost anyone, then leave that person with a question they may not have expected to carry. That question is not simply, are we biased? It is quieter than that. It is, what stories did I inherit before I knew they were stories? That is where the film's lasting value lies, not in the perfection of its allegory, not in the neatness of its mystery, not even in the cleverness of its city, though the city remains one of the most imaginative animated spaces Disney has ever built. Its value lives in the way it makes self-examination feel like part of hope. Judy does not become less inspiring when she is wrong. She becomes more real. Nick does not become less charming when we see his wound. He becomes more complete, and Zootopia does not become less beautiful when we see its cracks. It becomes more meaningful because beauty without truth is only decoration. The people who will love this film most deeply are those who enjoy animation that works on more than one level. If you love world building, you will find endless pleasure here. If you love character dynamics, Judy and Nick give the film a warm, funny, wounded heart. If you love social fables, there is enough inside the metaphor to keep turning it over long after the credits. And if you have ever felt underestimated, or misread, or trapped inside someone else's idea of you, this film may reach you in a way its colorful surface does not prepare you for. But some may not connect with it as deeply. If you want a social allegory with complete complexity, Zootopia may feel too simplified. If you want a mystery with more danger, the detective structure may feel too clean. If you are sensitive to metaphors that use natural animal categories to discuss prejudice, you may feel the film's central idea creates problems even as it opens important conversation. Those criticisms are fair. They do not erase what the film does well. They simply remind us that ambition always leaves visible edges. For me, Zootopia is worth watching, worth revisiting, and worth talking about. It is not just something to stream once in the background. It has too much craft for that. It is the kind of film you can enjoy lightly, then return to more seriously. I would not call it perfect cinema. I would call it thoughtful, popular cinema. The kind that understands how entertainment can become a doorway. My rating is 6.4 out of 10. And that rating means this. Zootopia is a smart, warm, visually rich modern fable whose ideas are sometimes bigger than its structure, but whose heart remains honest enough to make those ideas matter. When the film ends, I do not think about a perfect city. I think about a city still learning how to deserve its own promise. And maybe that is the most honest ending it could have given us. Thank you for spending this time with me here on the Cineflux. I know Zootopia is often remembered as a fun animated adventure, and it absolutely is that. But films like this are worth slowing down for because they remind us that animation is not a smaller form of cinema, it is cinema with different freedoms. It can soften difficult ideas without making them meaningless. It can turn a city of animals into a mirror. It can make us laugh, then ask us to look more carefully at the world we move through every day. If this essay gave you a new way to think about Zootopia, or if it made you want to revisit the film with older eyes, stay close to the channel. Like the video if you felt something here, subscribe if you want more cinematic essays like this, and share your thoughts in the comments, because I would genuinely love to know how this film sits with you now. Do you think Zootopia's metaphor still works, or do its limits stand out more with time? Which moment feels most honest to you, Judy's ambition, Nick's pain, or the city's fear? And when you rewatch the film, do you find yourself trusting its hopeful ending, or questioning how much healing really happened after the story closed? Next time, we will step into another film and look for the quiet truth beneath its surface, not just what happens in the story, but what the story understands about us. Until then, keep watching closely, keep feeling deeply, and keep returning to the films that refuse to leave you. That is the Cineflux. I will see you in the next one.